Hi, you guys. Welcome back to the Inner Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Carolina, and I'm so grateful you're listening today. And I am so excited because I feel like over the last few months, I've been doing a lot of solo episodes, and we're finally picking up the guest episodes back up, and I couldn't be kicking it off in a better way. I am sitting down with Sahil Bloom, who is an author and entrepreneur. He is releasing a new book called The 5 Types of Wealth, and we're going to be diving into so many things today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to do it.
I am so excited. I was taking a look at all your content I was already telling you, and I think it's really special to have you on the podcast because a lot of the guests that I've had are women, and I feel like, I don't know, this is just my impression a little bit, but I find sometimes that men have a little bit of a harder time diving into like personal growth or tools like journaling, like things like this. So I think it'll be really refreshing to like have you bring your perspective to the podcast and also share all your amazing advice. So the first thing that I ask all of my guests, and it's okay if you don't know the answer, is do you know your sun, moon, and rising in astrology?
No.
Do you know your sun sign, like your zodiac sign?
Capricorn.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
nice.
Okay, but now it's like prompting me. I feel like I need to figure this out.
Yeah.
Sun, moon, and rising. Those are the 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can look it up after. You just need
I
to
will.
know like the time that you were born and where.
Okay.
But okay, I love the Capricorn energy because Capricorn is a lot about like ambition. Also, it's kind of like this idea of like a mountain goat. So it's always like climbing the mountain and like learning the path as you go so that when you go down the mountain, you already know kind of like all these skills. I feel like that kind of like ties in a little bit with
That
what you're
very
about.
much ties into what I'm about. Now that's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't feel like I've studied enough or like immersed myself enough in astrology in general. And so it's interesting to me to even hear you articulate that.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that does capture a lot of, I feel like, my personality. And also like, I mean, even just the concepts of the book and how it's like a manifestation of my journey, bringing that out.
Yeah, I don't know. I just have a hunch that you have some Sagittarius energy. So you'll have to find out if it's like in your moon or rising.
All right.
Let me know after.
I'll follow up with
Yeah.
you and let you know.
Okay, amazing. So diving right in, I really like taking a step back and being like, okay, you're here writing this amazing book. You put out all this awesome content. You're super insightful. I like taking us back to like the beginning. So what prompted you to get into this world of like self-development, personal growth? Like, was there a moment for you that like things changed? Wherever you want to start, just I'm curious to know a little bit about like how you got here.
I always find it helpful just with relationships in general and new relationships like this one, and anyone listening for that matter, to start from a place of vulnerability. And I have this hypothesis that vulnerability is what actually creates strength. And so starting from a place of vulnerability, I spent the first 30 years of my life making most of my decisions on the basis of insecurity. And the root of that insecurity was what I would call these original stories that I used to tell myself. So we all have stories that we tell ourselves about who we are as people, about how we operate in the world, about what our competencies are, or what our deficiencies are, all of those things. We create these original stories when we're very young, and then they have ripple effects into every area of our life. And one of the unfortunate things is that most of us go our entire lives without questioning the basis or legitimacy of those original stories. One of the original stories that I told myself was that I was not very smart, that I wasn't very capable. And part of that was grounded in the fact that I had an older sister who was extraordinarily high achieving and very smart, very ambitious. And coming from a family that really prided itself on academic achievement, I created this impression that I was not the smart one. I was going to be the athletic one. She was the smart one. And that internally, no matter how much my parents told me it wasn't true, that story took hold and took root. And what it led to was me making almost every decision, looking back on it, on the basis of that insecurity, that feeling that I wasn't good enough. And so what you do when you feel like you're not good enough is you look for people to tell you that you are good. You make every decision on the basis of trying to achieve some level of external affirmation that will
validation.
Exactly, you're looking for that. So you do things that will get you validation because you assume incorrectly that you're going to wake up one day with enough validation that you feel good internally. And if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it is that you cannot fix an internal problem with an external solution. No matter how much validation you get, how many people patting you on the back, it will not fix it. You will not wake up and feel like you're enough. And so when I look back at my life now, that was such a fundamental and incorrect story that I was telling myself. And it took me 30 years to break down that story and to look at myself in the mirror and recognize that it wasn't true. I was grounding so many decisions in my life in something that was fundamentally not the case. And so my real journey, and the journey that has sparked this book and all of the content that I create, started after I turned 30, when I had gotten to the point in my life where I was marching down these external validation paths. I had taken a job that I thought would make me sound successful, that I thought would make me all of the money in the world, which would make me feel powerful and successful, and that other people would think I was impressive. And one of the challenging things you realize is being impressive to others is very overrated if you don't feel impressive to yourself. And I never really felt impressive to myself. And that journey and the pain that it took me through and the sort of rock bottom moment, which I'm happy to share, was what sparked this sort of rebirth, if you will. I don't know if you're familiar with, in ancient Indian culture, there's this concept of Kala Chakra. It's the idea of the wheel of time, that like cosmic time goes through an endless cycle of creation, destruction, and then rebirth. And it's a rather healing concept, because what it means is that during every period of destruction that you are going through, that you are feeling, that is a necessary precursor to whatever rebirth you are destined for, whatever the next thing is. And that, as Rumi said, the wound is where the light enters you. And that period of destruction in my life was really what has led to this whole rebirth that I feel I've had.
Oh my God. Wow. First of all, like, I love all of that. And I was just smiling so much because that was me also for like my entire life. In my case, it's like a little bit reversed because I'm the older sister that's like the hyperachieving one. And then I have a younger brother that's like very athletic, and it's like very similar dynamic. But that was me my entire life too, doing things that I thought would make my parents proud and would get me a validation and would get me straight A's and all these external things. And then in 2020 was when I hit my personal rock bottom moment, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing all these things that I don't even like, and it doesn't give you that long-term happiness because you're always chasing something outside of you. And everything you said is literally like inner growth coded. It's exactly what we're about in this podcast, what I talk about every single week. So I'm really happy that you're here. It's also low key the definition of Capricorn energy. Like, Capricorn energy is a lot about like the external validation and learning to find the internal validation instead, where it's like you can achieve all these amazing things, but when it's giving you the internal fulfillment, that's when you shine the most, because like you're going to be good at whatever you do. Like, you're a motivated person, you're ambitious, you're going to succeed. So if you're doing it on something that you're not really passionate about, yeah, you'll do well. But if you do it with what you're passionate about and what sparks joy inside of you, then you'll kick ass and you'll like do amazing and you'll be happy, right? So that's the best thing.
There's this
And
idea that I write about in the book. It's called the arrival fallacy. It's this cognitive phenomenon that we think that when we achieve that thing, whatever that summit is that we're looking at, when we achieve it, we're going to suddenly feel like we've arrived, that we've made it, that it's enough. And it's a fallacy, because what happens is you get there, and as we both know, and as many of the listeners know, is you get that thing, and then you feel the like short-term dopamine hit from achieving it, and then really you're just like this letdown of, is that it? Is that what it is? And there's some new sight that you have to set your sights on. And that, to me, is like the fundamental shift. It's recognizing that the real joy, the real happiness has to come from the climb and the process and the hunt.
and the journey of every day.
It's in the becoming, not in the having.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, see the mountain.
Mm.
There you go. There you go.
Exactly.
The mountain goat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I've heard that before as well. And I feel like that also applies to money. And I know you touch on that in the book too, right? Where it's like you make a certain amount of money, and then the next step is like, what's the next amount of money and what's the next? And so I'm also really big on just celebrating your achievements.
Mhm.
And I told you this, but a lot of the listeners and a lot of the people that I work with are perfectionists. It's really hard sometimes when you are so high achieving and so hard on yourself to really validate yourself and be like, oh my God, like we achieved it, we did it, we got here, and like really soak up the good of the moments when you like reached a goal. So yeah, that fallacy is really interesting. And I'd be curious to know about the rock bottom moment, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. So in May of 2021, to set the context, that's about a year after the lockdowns and COVID had started. And I had spent the prior 7 years of my life and my career marching down this like very traditional path. I was working in finance. I was making more and more money every year, constantly thinking that my fulfillment, happiness, and joy was on the other side of whatever bonus, promotion, fancy bottle of wine, whatever thing was next. And every single year, inevitably, I would get that thing and then immediately feel nothing and feel like, is this it? and it was never enough. And from the outside looking in, after that 7-year period, you would have said I was winning the game. Like, I had made more and more money, I was getting promoted, everything looked good. And internally, everything was falling apart. My relationship with my wife was really suffering. We were struggling to conceive at the time. And this is something that people don't talk about publicly. It's something that I think people feel a stigma associated with. And it was a burden that my wife had been carrying for that whole year. And because of where I was mentally in my life, I don't feel I had been present enough to help carry that burden, to carry my portion of it, or frankly, to carry it, because it was probably my fault in hindsight, physically and stress wise. My relationship with my parents was suffering. My sister was almost non-existent. My health was suffering. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. Mental health. There were all of these other areas of my life that were slowly falling apart, while the one area of making money was going up and to the right. It looked great. And in May of 2021, I had a conversation with an old friend that completely changed my life. I sat down for drinks with him. We hadn't gotten together in a while, and he asked how I was doing. And I said, I'm good, busy. The standard response that everybody says when someone asks how they're doing. He kind of looked at me and saw through it and asked again. And I just said that it was starting to get really hard living on the West Coast, 3,000 miles away from our families. My parents, my wife's parents. I was really close with my parents and just not seeing them. And he asked, well, how old are they? I said, mid-60s. And he said, how often do you see them? And I said, about once a year. And he looked at me and just said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. And I remember just feeling like I had gotten punched in the gut. I mean, the idea that the amount of time you have left with the people that you hold closest to you is so countable, so finite, that you can literally place it on a few hands, was shaking me to my core. And I went home that night, and the next morning I told my wife that I thought we needed to make a change. And within 45 days, we had sold our house in California. I left my job, and we moved back to the East Coast to be closer to our families. And the most beautiful thing in all of that was that after a year of struggling to conceive and my wife about to start all these treatments, 2 weeks after we got home and made that change, she got pregnant.
Wow.
And it still makes me emotional thinking about, like, after my son was born, we drove home from the hospital, and I just remember, I'll never forget pulling into our driveway and both of our sets of parents being there, like, to to welcome us home. And that feeling that it's like no change has ever improved our quality of life more than moving across the country to be close to the people we love. And no job will ever pay you enough to pull you away from the people that matter most to you. And it was a reminder that when your life comes into alignment, when that energy comes into alignment, everything comes into alignment. And I know you talk a lot about energy with your people, with your listeners. I can't imagine a better example from my own life. And it was something that honestly I didn't believe in for most of my life. Like, I would have said, oh yeah, that woo-woo, like, doesn't make sense to me. And now I couldn't be a bigger believer in it because I saw it. Like, I felt that in my own life. Everything was out of alignment. So all of the things in my life were out of alignment. Where I was personally, professionally, spiritually, like, with my wife, our ability to have a child, all of those things were out of alignment. Suddenly, when the one decision was made that brought things into alignment, everything fell into place as it should. And that has been that was the start of the journey that led to me writing this book, led to me sharing these ideas with the world, because I felt them so viscerally in my own life. And that's why I feel so strongly about this. That's why I set out on this journey, is because I want other people to experience that same joy that I have felt.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I literally start crying too, because I could feel how, like, much of an impact that had on you. And that's why I love what you said in the very beginning of the podcast too, how, like, being vulnerable creates connection and helps people understand you, see you, and, like, get to know you better. And I resonate a lot with what you shared because I moved from Brazil to the US with my parents when I was 13. And right now they live in Florida and I live in New York. And my husband's parents live in Brazil. And we have this conversation like once a week of like, where are we going to live? Where are we going to eventually buy a house? Where we're
Mhm.
going to have a family? And this like push and pull between like doing whatever you want to do, quote unquote, and versus like being close to your family. And as someone who values family so much too, and we're both so close to our parents, it's something we think about so
Mhm.
much. So it's very validating to hear how like transformative just making that decision to like prioritize that in your life was for you.
Yeah.
And it's also like support, connection. That is such a big part of our health that like really is
Yeah.
underestimated. And I know you mentioned that in the book too.
Mhm.
So I think this is like the perfect pivot for us to like start
Yeah.
talking about some of the concepts from the book. I've recently, after I became self-employed, realized the importance of community and connection because I'm probably going to get this wrong, but I saw some type of statistic or fact that it was like not seeing anyone for like a whole week or like being a few days isolated in your house is like equally as bad for you as like a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah. Cigarettes. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. 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 There's, I mean, loneliness is worse for you than smoking like 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
I mean,
like,
there's legitimate science around it now. It's crazy.
yeah.
Um, yeah, there is clear scientific evidence that the strength of your relationships has more impact on your physical health than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
The Harvard study of adult development was this 80 plus year longitudinal study, the longest ever longitudinal study on happiness. And basically, they tracked the lives of 1,300 participants over 80 plus years. And what they found was that the single greatest predictor of your health, physical health at age 80, was relationship satisfaction at age 50. It was more impactful than your blood pressure, your cholesterol levels, your BMI, like any other physical metric. It was more impactful how you felt about your connection to those around you. And we don't think about it. I mean, we don't think about the role that our connection has on our happiness, joy, and also our health, how we actually age over time. And you find it time and time again. I mean, married people are healthier over the course of their lives. They live longer. I mean, there are crazy statistics around it. And we live in a world now where I would argue that loneliness is like the real pandemic that we all face. I mean,
Yeah.
teenagers are spending 70% less time with their friends in person than they were 2 decades ago. It's like terrifying statistics around this. And what you find over and over again is like your ability to experience other types of wealth. Like the whole book is about all these different types of wealth, and your ability to enjoy and experience any of the other types is fundamentally bounded by your social wealth, by your connection to other people. Because, like, what good is having a lot of money if you're all by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't want to be sitting on a yacht by myself. That sounds
Mm-hmm.
miserable. Like, what's the point if you don't have people to dote upon? What's the point of, like, being on some like journey with all this free time and purpose if you don't have people to enjoy it with at the end of the day?
100%. And I think it's so real because ever since 2020, I think that's something a lot of us have
Mhm.
realized and learned. And, when the lockdown period started, like everyone was trying to find different ways to connect, like virtually. But I think over the last few years, as that period of our lives has like fizzled a little bit and we're in this new chapter of like society, I think everyone is craving in-person
Yeah.
connection. And as I was saying, when I started working for myself like full time, within like 8 months or so, I was not prioritizing really like seeing other people. My husband started an office job, so I wasn't seeing him every day in the same way I was before. And I got really, really mentally unwell.
Mhm.
Like I got really sad.
Mhm.
And I would like start crying and I didn't know I was so sad. And then one day I was sitting with myself and I was like, I think I'm lonely.
Mhm.
Like I think I'm just not seeing people. So I started to really take that into my own hands and like co-work with friends and like actively plan date nights with my husband and do different things, and it makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
So what's one of the biggest things that you have learned on like how to cultivate social wealth?
I think it's doing the tiny things. And this will probably be something that resonates with listeners and you. Perfectionists and highly ambitious people tend to allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial. Meaning, if you can't spend 3 hours with someone, you just think like, okay, I won't spend any
Yes,
time.
0
Or
100.
yeah, or like, oh, I don't have an hour to work out, so I'm just not going to work out. Or I don't have 2 hours for deep work, so I'm not going to work. And the reality is anything above zero compounds. Meaning like doing the tiny thing pushes the ball forward. It gets you a little better off than you were yesterday. So you should do those tiny things. We don't always have time for the like hour lunch date with a friend, but you always have time to send someone a text to let them know you're thinking about them, or to give someone a quick call of like, hey, something funny happened. I would love to tell you about it. Those little things compound in your relationships the same way that like tiny investments compound for your financial future. And needing to treat social wealth and relationships that same way is a really good way to do this. It's like take those tiny actions on a daily basis. Reach out to the person. When you think something nice about someone, let them know right then. If you have a funny memory that pops up in your mind, tell the person. I started doing this thing. I don't know if you have an iPhone, but like the iPhone has this For You feature on your pictures where it'll like surface old memories and different things like that. And it's always pictures with other people from all these like dates in your history. And I just start sending them to whoever's in the picture with me. So like on a weekly basis, I'm sending texts off to a bunch of old friends of like a picture of all of us doing something fun. 100% of the time, it sparks some fun, like, even if it's like a 2-minute catch up interaction that makes you feel good. Like you feel reconnected to these people that you haven't necessarily talked to. And it's just the reminder is like, find the reason to go and do that thing, to like feel that little bit of connection, because it doesn't actually take a lot. And when you start to assume it takes a lot, that's when you don't do anything and you retreat. And like in my own life, I saw the impact of this and the impact it can have on health. Like my grandmother in India, 90 years old, and she turned 90 March of 2019. We all went over and saw her for her 90th birthday. She was like a complete wonder of the world, like so intelligent, so sharp. I mean, in another life, she would have been a movie star, like just an incredible storyteller, just like a personality that lit up an entire room. And, you know, she sat down with me and like destroyed me in Scrabble at age 90. Like she's just incredible. COVID hit and suddenly her like very vibrant social calendar was taken to zero. And she was in all these clubs that she couldn't do. She, you know, for 15 years after my grandfather had passed away, had probably not gone a single day without someone coming to visit her. It's part of Indian culture. You do that, you keep people integrated. But like she would see people, spend time, have lunches every single day. COVID made it impossible. When we went and visited her in January of 2022, she was nearly catatonic. Like, you know, we're talking about an 18-month difference. And the impact that isolation had on her health, there actually wasn't really anything physically that had happened. It was just the impact of this. Within literally 12 hours of us all being there, it was like new life had been breathed into her. Suddenly she was back, like she was playing Scrabble, she was there, she was present. And it was a clear, like very visual, visceral example to me of that, the impact that social connection actually has on our cognitive and physical abilities.
100%. I love both of those examples, and it can be so quick, right? That just like being surrounded by people you love or by friends, anyone really, that you can just spark so much new joy that maybe you weren't activating before. And what is your opinion on quality of connection versus quantity of connection?
Quality. I was going to actually mention this, that like it's also about cultivating social wealth with the right people.
Yeah.
In my 20s, I was obsessed with being liked, and I wanted everyone to like me. And the way that you get people to like you is there will be a lot of people who like you if you have no boundaries, if you say yes to everything, if you people please, if you avoid hard conversations, if you let things slide. And your real people, your real ones, will love you if you do the opposite. If you set boundaries, if you take care of yourself, if you have hard conversations, that is actually how you cultivate real depth of connection. I'm a big believer in what I talk about in the book is that these two important pillars of social wealth are depth with the core people that you love, the depth that you have with them, and then breadth with your connection to something bigger than yourself. That doesn't need to be having hundreds of friends, but having something bigger than yourself, whether it's a community or a club or some set of ideas, something that you are attached to that allows you to feel that sort of breadth of connection to something bigger than the self. Those two are kind of in concert, how I think about it. But not allowing these ambivalent or toxic relationships to pervade your life is a very important way to improve the quality of your existence. Ambivalent relationships, scientifically, have been shown to be more harmful to your life and health than toxic ones. And, an ambivalent relationship is one where the person is sometimes hot, sometimes cold. And the reason it's worse
Mm.
is because we let those people in. If someone is purely toxic, you know to just put up a barrier around them. You're not going to allow them in. But the ambivalent relationship is so deceptive because sometimes that person is there for you and warm. And so then you let them in so that when they are toxic, they're inside your
It,
veil
like,
and
hurts.
it really hurts. Identifying and understanding who those people are and making sure that you treat them accordingly is a challenging but very important thing to do for your life.
So what have you learned about how to navigate those types of relationships specifically?
You have to know how people make you feel energy wise. So I mentioned this earlier. I'm a huge believer in energy now.
Mhm.
And this is how I manage my time. It's how I manage my relationships too. You know how someone made you feel after spending time with them. Do you feel excited to go and think bigger about your life, to treat people better, to improve yourself, to grow, to do all of these positive things? Or do you feel drained after spending time with someone? Do you feel down? Do you feel bad about yourself? You know that. If you ask yourself that question after you spend time with someone, you'll immediately know if that's someone you should be spending more time with or less time with.
For sure.
Allowing yourself to answer that question and then actually acting on that information is a huge way to improve your life.
For sure. And I heard you talk about this, I think it was on a reel or a TikTok that I saw about, being really aware of who will be there for you and like the hard moments and who will show up for you to like really support you when you have nothing to give them. And I feel like that is like pretty talked about. I've heard other people talk about this too, and I've thought about this as well. It's like who was there for me in my like lowest times. But something that I've learned this year is like who is there with you on the moments that you're thriving? Like who can hold space for your success and who can like lift you up when you're doing really well. So, what have you learned about that? Like is that something you've experienced like as you've grown in your career or in your relationships in your life in general? Have you learned anything about like different friends who maybe saw you succeed and then you were maybe a little bit disappointed
Yeah.
by how they showed up?
Yeah, I mean one of the harsh truths of life is that most people don't want you to be successful. It's one of the saddest things that you learn as you start to experience some level of success in your own life is that like a lot of the people that you thought were going to be excited for you are not. And there's something very sad about that. There's also something really beautiful because what you do identify is the people who truly are genuinely happy for you. There's no reservation about their joy that in seeing you win. And you know very quickly who are your real ones, who are like who are your like yes friends, if you will, the people who just default to saying yes, to being there with you in good times, in bad times, in the crazy adventures, in the like boring moments. They just default to being there with you. And they don't need to say anything. It doesn't need to be loud. They don't need to be like offering advice all the time, but they are just there with you in those moments. When you start to experience success, you very quickly have to figure out who those people are. And
Mhm.
you have to tune in to the like very subtle signals that people send because it's not always going to be obvious, the people that aren't truly there with you in those moments,
Mhm.
but you can see it on their face. I think it
For
was
sure.
Robert Greene that said that like when you talk about a win with someone, there's people that will like say, "Oh, great," but you'll see in their face the like little scorn. And then there will be people when you say the bad thing, like that happened, oh, the bad thing, and they'll be like, "Oh no," but you can see a little hint of a smile. And you need to tune in to like identify those subtle signals that people send about who they are and about whether they are genuine or if they are just, like the proverbial crab in the bucket trying to like pull you back down to where they are.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's like one of the hardest things I've learned in my social life, in my relationships, in my friendships. And it can be really painful, like you were saying, because a lot of the times these are those like ambivalent friendships. It's like the people that you have let in and that you consider a friend, but then realizing someone doesn't want to see you win, it's
Mm,
so hard to swallow.
mm,
Something else I want to dive into that we kind of touched on in the beginning, tying into like the 0 and 100 mindset with time
mm,
for perfectionists specifically. This is something that I'm very curious about because one, I remember like when I was in therapy, I was talking to my therapist and she did this exercise where she would just like give me a bunch of words and she would ask me to say the first word that I associated it with. And when she said time, I said running out. And time again too in my coaching, this is something I've noticed in my clients too, that they'll feel like there's never enough time, or this like accelerated sense of time, like you can never do everything that you want to do, and oh, the years going by faster and faster. And I know that time wealth is one of the things you dive into in the book. And also, the second reason why I wanted to dive into this is because when I was doing research and like looking at some of your content for this episode, I realized that one of the graphs that I saw in the last like year or two that like really changed my life was this graph that I'm pretty sure you shared, that it's like five different types of things plotted on a graph and the amount of time that you spent on them. So it's like time with your family, time with your
Mm-hmm.
kids, time at work with coworkers. And I really want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So let's dive into this chart, and
Yeah.
I'll pop it on screen in the video episode so people can
Yeah.
see it. But yeah, let's
Yeah.
talk about time wealth.
Yeah. It's in the time wealth section of the book. And yeah, probably one of the most impactful things I've shared publicly in the past as well. And I'm excited for people to see it in the book and engage with it. There's a few ways to think about this. So the ancient Greeks had two words for time. They had chronos, which was the idea of just kind of like linear time. And then they had kairos, which was this idea that not all time was created equal, that there were certain moments, certain windows, certain points that have higher importance than others. And that is a very interesting and important concept for us to internalize when it comes to time wealth, because what it says is that it's not really about time. We all have enough time. What we don't have enough of is like energy to deploy into those important moments of time. And if we're pulling our energy across every single moment and treating them all as equal, we're not going to have enough energy to put into those really important ones. It's just going to be like any of them are the same. The charts, and the reason that ties into them, is because what the charts show is that there are specific, shorter than you'd like to think, windows of time that carry higher importance with the people, specifically with the people in your life. The greatest example of that is with children. And I'm in one of those right now, where there is a 10-year window when you are your child's favorite person in the entire world. And
so cute. It's true.
During that time, you literally are their favorite person. And after it, you will never occupy that same role in their life. They will have friends, best friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, spouses, partners of their own. All of these other people will be their favorite person. But for that 10-year window, you are truly their one. And we live, unfortunately, in a culture and society when that also happens to coincide with the period of time in your life when you are chasing every single ambition and version of more that you can possibly come up with. And we constantly say, I'll spend more time with my kids later. I'm going to go achieve this thing. I'm going to make this amount of money. I'm going to do these things. I'll spend time with my kids later. Later doesn't exist. Later quite literally does not exist. It is another word for never. And if you don't build these things into your life now, if you don't find the energy to deploy into them now, there's no such thing as later, because your kids aren't going to be 5 years old later.
Yes.
They're going to be 25, and you're not going to have the relationship with them that you have right now. And so much of those charts is a call to action to recognize those moments that you're in, recognize those that kairos time, and put your energy into those things. Find your way to navigate that tension, that balance between wanting to chase your personal ambitions and being present with those people. And asking those questions is the most important thing, because if there's one thing that I try to get across in the book is that there's no such thing as the answers for your life. I can't give you the blanket answers for your life. You know, this is going to probably stereotype, but the vast majority of male influencers or content creators are forcing answers down someone's throat.
True.
They're saying like, this is the only way to eat, otherwise you're going to be fat, or this is the only way to make money, otherwise you're going to be broke, or this is the only way to, whatever.
Yeah, it's so true.
And the entire book and my entire ethos on life is that I do not have the answers for you. I'm 33 years old, right? Like, I'm living out my own answers and my own journey, but I can't give you the answers because your life is completely different than mine, your considerations, your priorities. What I can do is help you ask the right questions. I can help you navigate the questions, help you wrestle with the questions so that you can come to your own answers. And that's the important thing about those charts. Everyone will experience them differently. You'll look at them and see different things in them, see different things that are important to you, and you need to think about those and come to your own answers.
For sure. I think that's also the reality of operating and working in the space of like mindset and self-growth, it's like everyone has a different context.
Mhm.
So you can teach concepts, you can ask questions, that kind of thing, but it's also up to the person consuming that type of content to act on it and
Mhm.
to make the changes that they feel they need to do when they look within and they really analyze like, okay, this is how I'm living my life. And yeah, that chart was just so transformative for me. And I was actually having a conversation with some of my husband and I's closest friends this past weekend. And we were talking about like having kids and timelines for that, etc. And I told them that something I learned in the last couple of years is that we as humans think that the moment that we are in is going to be like this forever. It's kind of this like tendency that we have where it's like we get so caught up in the way things are right now and we forget that in a couple years it's probably going to be quite different. I remember having this conversation with my husband once where we were talking about like our careers and where we were at and like buying a house and like how much money we would need for that. And I told him like the way you are operating in right now within your job, your career, it's going to be very different in like 5 years, in 10 years. So, what we'll be able to create for ourselves will also change. And I think that's also a big reality about time. And that ties into like when you have a newborn versus when you have like a 5 year old or a 10-year old, or when you first get a puppy versus when the dog is like a few years old. So, things are constantly changing and they're in motion.
Mm.
So, that's why I think being present is also so important. And touching on this concept of being like a time billionaire. What does that mean?
Yeah. This is one of my favorite ideas in the book. It's from an investor named Graham Duncan, who a very successful investor. And what he shared is that he's interviewed hundreds and hundreds of young people to join his firm over the years. And what he always noticed was that they all want to be billionaires. That's like their goal, right? They want to make $1 billion. And he flagged and sparked the fact that they are all billionaires in one sense, which is they are time billionaires.
Mm.
There's about 30 years. A billion seconds is about 30 years. And at age 20, you have roughly 2 billion seconds left in your life. At age 50, you have about 1 billion seconds if you just estimate you're going to live till 80. And yet, you don't treat yourself like a time billionaire. You don't treat the fact that you have that time as your most precious asset, which it very much is. Like Warren Buffett, I write about this in the book. Warren Buffett is worth about $130 billion. But if I asked you if you would trade lives with Warren Buffett, you would say no, because he's 95 years old. There's no way you would trade all of your time for $130 billion. And similarly, if you asked him, he would definitely trade $130 billion for the amount of time that you have left.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that this time has immense, almost like incomprehensible value. And yet we do things on a daily basis that spit on it. We don't treat it that way. We don't treat the importance of that time alongside all of these other things in our lives. And it's very important to recognize. It's like placing a higher awareness on how finite, how impermanent your time is, and how it is your most precious asset is probably one of the key mindset shifts that allows you to unlock all of these other things.
For sure. And to like optimize how you're spending your time too. Something I've been thinking a lot about is what tasks am I just spending too much time on that aren't essential for me to be doing them?
Mhm.
Like what can I outsource? What can I get help with? And like what is essential for me to be doing?
Yeah.
But I love that idea because it kind of shifts that mindset that I was sharing earlier of like time's running out or like, oh, there's never enough time to being abundant in the time that you have, especially like when you're 20, 30 and like not like 95.
Yeah.
Right. And something else I wanted to just pick your brain on is the financial wealth side of things. I know we've talked a little bit about how like you worked in finance and you were focused only on that side of wealth for a long time. So I'm happy that we touched on like social wealth, time wealth, these other elements as well, because I think they're so important. But I'm curious to dive into that a little bit. And I know you mentioned some pillars of
Mhm.
financial wealth in the
Mhm.
book. So for anyone who's like just graduated college and is starting their careers or has been building their careers for a few years and is trying to figure out that sector of their lives,
Mhm.
what advice would you have or what
Yeah.
have you learned?
Yeah. So one of the issues with the world we live in today is that complex, sexy solutions sell much better than the simple, boring basics. And
Mm.
the reason the simple, boring basics are still around or still known is because they work. Yet, it's much easier to sell you some sexy thing. Like if I go to a cocktail party and people ask me about my investment strategy and I tell them that I dollar cost at I put a little bit of money into the S&P 500 every month, no one's really going to be interested to talk to me. If I say that I'm investing in some crypto call, covered call, arbitrage, hedge fund, whatever, everyone's all of a sudden going to find me really interesting and want to talk to me. It doesn't mean I'm actually doing better. It's actually probably stupid and I'm going to lose money on that. But complex, sexy things sell, especially with intelligent people. We think that complex means better, when in reality, it doesn't. Simple is beautiful. And so when it comes to financial wealth, my belief is that fundamentally anyone that has achieved a high degree of financial wealth has basically followed these three pillars. One is income generation, growing your income over periods of time, generally speaking, through the accumulation and compounding of skills. You build skills that are valuable and you leverage those skills in the market. People are willing to pay you more and more for them over time. Two is managing your expenses. The most important part with managing your expenses is managing your expectations. Expectations are the single greatest financial liability that you have, because if your expectations grow faster than your assets, you will never be rich. If you continue to think that you need more and more and more and more in order to be happy, then you will never be rich, because you'll just be chasing this mirage. Every time you get close to it, it'll disappear and reappear in the future. And then the third pillar is just the long-term compounding of assets. And the important piece there is you have income growing, you have your expenses hopefully not growing as fast, and there's a gap between those two that's created. Investing that gap into things that compound over long periods of time is how you become financially wealthy. That is in simple things like index funds, that is in real estate, that is in anything that accumulates and compounds over long periods of time. Every single rich person in the world has done some version of those three pillars. So not buying into whatever complex, fancy solution someone wants to sell you, and just recognizing that everything comes down to operating across those three, that is the path that 99% of people should focus on and follow.
Yeah, and I really like how most of your concepts also kind of center on time, which, as my astrology living self, like time is like one of the keywords associated with Capricorn, just so you know.
It all makes sense.
Yeah,
There you
it
go.
makes sense. But it's just seeing how, like, what you were saying, right? These like complex, fancy, sexy solutions, usually they're very short-term focused. Like, invest in crypto and like you're gonna get like $100,000 in a few months, versus being like, okay, what about like throughout my entire life? How can I like always be making money and grow like that, for example?
I mean, everyone's looking for the easy, right? Like that's
it applies to fitness.
everyone's looking for the hack, right? Everyone wants the shortcut or the hack. And the harsh reality is that there is nothing easy about building the life you want. And actually, you should run away from the easy things, because there's a lot of important things that come from doing the hard, going about it the hard way, doing the hard thing. That is actually where you earn the most valuable returns. It's like the concept that delayed gratification is fundamentally the key to life. When I am first meeting someone, I would say the number one value I look for in that person is whether they embrace the idea of delayed gratification, because delayed gratification applies to every single area of life. If you think that you can just have a deep relationship right out of the gate with someone, not that you have to navigate it, that you have to grow in it by sitting in the mud with them, by having the hard conversations, those hard things are where great relationships are built. I've said this before, but like, in romantic relationships, falling in love is very, very easy. Growing in love is very, very hard. Falling in love is like the shortcut. It's the hack. It's the thing you see on social media, the fancy Instagram picture, the beautiful dates, the filtered moments. Growing in love, no one shares on Instagram because it's messy.
It's like navigating conflict, having difficult conversations.
Boundaries, hard conversations, like the tough moments when things weren't working and you had to grow through that with someone. And if you focus more on growing than on falling, that is how you build a great relationship. That is delayed gratification, because it takes a long, long time. And we know that fundamentally with certain things. But embracing that across every area of your life, embracing that across all of these 5 types of wealth, that is how you build a truly wealthy life. There's nothing short or hacky about it. There's no gimmick.
Yeah, and also it's like it's holistic. All of these things impact like being truly wealthy. And I'm curious to know, like, how do you define wealth?
Yeah.
Given this like new perspective that you're bringing on it.
Yeah, I mean, I define it across these 5 pillars that I talk about in the book. And the important point here, I'll raise 2 things that I think will resonate. One of the things I talk about in the book is this idea that your life has seasons. Yes. And this is very, very important, because the knowledge that your life has seasons means that what you prioritize or focus on during any one season can change. My wife, for example, right now, is in a season of being a mom. She is so immersed and so joyful about the time and focus and energy she has with our son, who's 2.5. That doesn't mean that that's all she's going to do for the rest of her life. If it's what she wants to do, then great. But if she wants to go back and work when he starts school, and she's a fashion designer, if she wants to start her own line, if she wants to go back to her old job, she can do that with the knowledge that these seasons change over time. We live in this culture and society where people want to pigeonhole you into the one thing, like, oh, if you're going to be a mom, you're just a mom now. People say that. It's like by the way, it's like, it's really harsh, and it's a stupid statement because first off, it says just, meaning like it's not enough, which I would argue it's the hardest job in the world, seeing my wife go through it and the energy required to be truly present as a mother. It's unbelievable. But also, it's just incorrect because who you are changes. You said this earlier, like who you are across different seasons of your life changes. Your identity, it is an ever-changing version of you. You are constantly, your body is literally replacing every single cell in your body over the course of a few years. Every single cell in your body has completely changed. You are the same. You are constantly changing, and embracing that change is a key to life. And so that concept, that idea of seasons, that idea of being able to be present in the current season, focus on certain things with the knowledge that you can change those things in the future, is a very empowering one.
Yeah, again, it's like not having that like fixed mentality of like the way things are now is how it's always going to be. It's like, no, you're always evolving, and life is too, and the people around you are. So it's important to grow with it instead of like trying to like hold on.
Yeah, and the other concept that I think is a really empowering one that I talk about is this idea that your life exists on dimmer switches, not on-off switches. Everyone wants to tell you that you have to pick the like one or two things that you're going to focus on. Be like, okay, well, you're just starting your career. So you have to focus on your career, and that means that you have to turn off. You can't think about your health. You can't think about your relationships. You just have to focus on your career. So everything's on an on-off switch. That's not really how life works. Every single one of these things is on a dimmer switch. And the important thing that I get across is what I said earlier. Just because you have the dimmer switch turned down on something doesn't mean you can't move it forward. Doesn't mean you can't do the couple of high leverage things that continue to progress that area of your life. It may not be your sole focus. You may not dramatically improve it, but it's not going to go backwards. You didn't turn it off. You can maintain it, and you can continue to grow it. So like, yeah, I may be working 90, 100-hour weeks right now because I'm really focused on building my business or on my career. That doesn't mean that I don't have time to send the text to the friend, to make sure they know I'm thinking about them, to continue to cultivate a few of those deep relationships. That doesn't mean that I can't take the 15-minute walk in the morning to make sure that my health is okay. Doesn't mean that I can't find the 6 or 7 hours to sleep per night to make sure that my health is okay. Those things are all about recognizing the dimmer switch, recognizing you don't have to shut something completely off. You can have it on low and still be making progress.
Yeah. And it's like those small actions, instead of falling to the 0 or 100, it's either all in or I can't do it.
Exactly. And we're all wired that way. I mean, again, like perfectionists, it's one of our worst tendencies is that you're wired that way. You think if you don't have an hour to do the thing, you shouldn't do it at all.
If I can't do it perfectly, then I'm failing, or I'm like, I might as well not do it at all.
So my whole life, I wanted to be a journaler. I was like, I had this like perfect version of myself in my mind where on January 1st every year, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to be a journaler this year. And I'd sit down and I'd be like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a journaler? Well, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes every night. I'm going to write down all these beautiful things. And it's going to be so beautiful in this notebook and candles and like this whole thing, right? And inevitably by like January 3rd or January 5th, I would stop. And it was because I had created this super high form of what journaling looked like. I ended up I pulled this back and I created something that I call my 1-1-1 method, which is at the end of every day, right before bed, I write down one win from the day, something that I feel good about, one point of stress or anxiety, something I'm stressed about, and then one point of gratitude, something that I felt grateful for during the day, big or small. And it is the most beautiful practice that I've embraced because it's 3 to 5 minutes. You force yourself to recognize something that you did well during the day. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be like, I woke up at the time I said I was going to, or I got myself dressed, whatever the thing is, but allowing yourself to give yourself a pat on the back for the thing that you did, the little win. It gets the bad thing off your brain. So before you go to bed, so that you don't have the like staring at the ceiling, mind spinning, get it off your head. And then it forces you to have that breath of gratitude that we know is so positive for our mental health, our sleep, all of these other things. 3 to 5 minutes. That's all it takes. And it's an incredible practice for life.
I mean, as you said, simple is beautiful.
Yes.
So
Good rule for life.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I feel like we could just keep talking like for hours and
Yeah.
hours,
Yeah.
but I want to do some like rapid fire questions to close out with you.
All right.
So the first one is, what does inner growth mean to you?
Comparison versus yourself from yesterday, and acknowledging every single day that you have the capacity to change.
I love that. What makes you feel like your best self?
Spending time with my wife and son, and just like seeing him laugh and smile and the joy that he has, for sure.
Tying it back to connection. Okay. Aside from your book, of course, what are some other books that have played a big role in your life and that you would recommend to anyone listening?
When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalinathy was probably the one book that I've like reread. I read it once a year. It's the story of a Stanford neurosurgeon, true story written by him, who is in the final year of his residency and gets diagnosed with terminal cancer, and writes the book during his last year of life, sort of wrestling with this terrible diagnosis and his own mortality in the context of life and birth and all of these things.
It's been on my like want to read list for a while.
Oh, it's a
probably a heavy book, but
it's a heavy book. It's very short. You can read it in a sitting. Yeah, you have to bring tissues for sure. But unbelievably powerful and eye-opening.
I'll have to read it.
Yeah.
And last question, if someone didn't listen to this entire episode and they just heard this part, what would you want to leave them with?
You have the answers within you. You just need to ask the right questions to reveal them. We all know, and we all have the correct answers sitting somewhere within us and within our bodies, within our minds. We just need to sit with the questions long enough to uncover those answers.
Yes. Give yourself that space to meet yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Thank you so much, Sahil, for coming on the podcast today. I loved getting to know you, talking to you. This was truly just like such a good conversation. I'm so excited to read the book. So tell everyone where they can follow you, read the book, find the book, connect with you, everything.
Yeah. Well, you can buy the book, The 5 Types of Wealth, anywhere books are sold. I always like to support local bookshops. So if you have a favorite local bookshop, go and pick it up there. Otherwise, Amazon. The more info at the5typesofwealth.com. And then you can find me at Sahil Bloom on any of the major platforms.
Amazing. And you also have a newsletter, right?
I do have a newsletter called The Curiosity Chronicle.
Okay, love that.
Yeah.
Everyone go check him out. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so grateful for you, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. You can connect with us at innergrowth.co on Instagram. We also release weekly podcast episodes, so I'll see you next week, and thank you again one more time for coming.
Thank you.